What's up guys, the Codeholic is here and welcome to the fifth part of building an MVC framework using PHP. In this part we're going to implement login and make some improvements of existing code. Okay, so let's open the login page, and right here we don't see anything. So let's go to the views, and I'm going to take everything from the register and paste in a login and change quickly. So create an account, no, it will be login. So we don't have that model not used, and I'm going to do this also on register. So this is the very good practice, and this will also help you later to find the usages of the model. Here's what I mean. So right here I'm going to create a PHP tag, and I'm going to declare that the variable of model is an instance of user, and that app model's user. That's inside the register PHP. Okay. Later, if I decide that I want to find all the usages of the app model's user using my IDE, it will find that, hey, you're using this model in the register PHP also. Okay, and this red underline also disappears. So I want something similar also on the login right here, just I don't have the model for login yet. So I know that my login model needs to have email and password, nothing else. That should make a post request on the same URL. Everything else basically is the same. And let's go to the let's create this model actually. So I'm going to call the model to be login form. That needs to extend just model, not DB model, because it doesn't map anything to the database. And let's add the methods tabs right here. We need rules, and I'm going to declare inside the rules that the email is self required, and we can also specify that it must be valid email address, and password is required. Okay, fine. We need to declare these properties as well. So public string email and password. Okay, now let's go to the auth controller, and we need to create the login method. We actually have it. So login form equals new login form. Then we check if the request is post. So I'm going to take the constructor, not the constructor, but the argument method, the parameter request, if is post. Okay, in this case I just load data in the login form. That will be request get body. Then I run the validation on the login form, validate, and I'm going to call a login form login method right here. And if everything is successful, then I'm going to redirect user to the home page. So for this, I'm going to use the response redirect, and actually I can accept response as a second argument, response right here. Okay, and I'm going to call response redirect, and I'm going to specify the slash. Okay, so when I load the data, if validate was successfully done and if the login returns true, we redirect user to the home page, and we just need to return. Also, we need to save the user somewhere, that we need to identify in the system that the user is actually authenticated, and based on this we need to do a couple of things. So we have to maybe let me show you. Maybe we have to hide these login and register buttons, links when the user is authenticated, and instead show welcome, I don't know, the Codeholic, for example. Okay, so we need to save this. For this, I'm going to create on application, I'm going to create a login method, and I'm going to pass right there the user. or I will do this inside the login form right here. So let's just create the login form, login method, okay, right here. And what do we need to do right here? So we need to find the user, let's call it login. We need to find the user based on the email, and if the user doesn't exist, we need to show an error. Then we need to check the password. If the password is not correct, we need to show an error. Otherwise, we just mark the user to be authenticated. Okay, so I'm gonna paste this right here, application app login, and I will get back to this line. Okay, but right here, I want to write a code which finds the user. So on the user, I would like to have a find method, find one maybe, because I want to find the single one, where I specify an associative array. Email corresponds to this email. Okay, I want to have something like this, and this finally gives me user, and I'm going to check if the user doesn't exist. Then I'm going to add an error on the email attribute, which will be displayed right, yeah, I'm going to fix this, but which will be displayed under the email input field. Okay, so I'm going to call this add error. But here is important thing. This add error accepts second argument to be rule, but I just want to pass the actual message. So email, and my message should be something like user does not exist with this email address. Okay, so maybe I need to have two methods, one add error which accepts a rule, and based on the rule it automatically gets the message. The second, just add error message. Okay, I'm going to actually rename this method because that should be more for internal usage inside the class, right? So I'm going to first change this into protected or even public, private. And right here it should be called add error for rule maybe, or let's just rename it, right click, refactor, rename, or use just shortcuts. Get familiar with shortcuts. I have on F2. So add error for rule, and this will change all the usages of the method. So we can search this inside the class. We see that now it's used on multiple places. If I just hit Ctrl Z, it's changed everywhere. So it's just add error. However, if I just hit F2, add error for rule, it changes everywhere at the same time. And I want similar method for just to add an error, and that should be public method. Okay, let's call it add error, attribute, and message. We don't want third argument, and this will simply add the message inside the errors for that attribute. If we go back to the login form, this add error looks good. After this, if there's an error, we can immediately return false. Okay, return false. If the user exists, we need to call password verify method, which accepts the first argument to be the plain password, and the second argument is the password hash. And in our case, it will be user password. Okay, and if that returns false, if the verification was not successfully done, I'm going to add an error for password attribute, and the error will be probably password is incorrect, and we return false. However, if user exists and the password was correct, we just pass that user to the login, and we can immediately return true, or we can just return whatever is returned from the application login. So we have to implement now a couple of methods. First is find one. So let's actually do this. We need to open DB model and maybe scroll down right here and create a method find one. Okay, now find one. This accepts where right here, and we need to make a select. So we need to make select from the table name. So first we need to take the table name equals static table name. Okay, the next thing, the table name is right here, so I cannot actually call self table name. So this is because the table name, self table name, is abstract. However, the static corresponds to an actual class on which the find one will be called, and we're calling find one on the user, so user table name will be used in that case. So we have the table name, and we need to take out all the keys on this where. So this where will be something like associative array email corresponds to zura@example.com, just like this. And maybe inside the where, if we're making this as a general find one function, it might have also first name corresponds to Zura, for example. So this where might look like this, and we need to consider this as well. So we have to take the attributes to be array keys of that where, and then I'm going to create the correct select statement. So my select should look like this: select everything from table name where, and I need to generate the where based on this where array. And if the where array looks like this, I need to generate my where email equals :email, which is the parameter which we will bind, and first name equals : first name. Okay, and then we're going to bind these parameters :email and :first name. Okay, so I have to actually generate such kind of string based on the attributes, and I'm going to call array map. Okay, and look at this, what I'm going to do. So the second argument, of course, is the attributes. We give the attributes right here, we get the attribute, and I just return attribute equals : attribute. Okay, so if the attribute is email, this is what will be returned from that callback function. So if the attribute is first name, this is what will be returned. And then I have an array of this and this, and I'm just going to combine them with end. Okay, and obviously if we just pass right here an array, this means that email equals to this and first name equals this. Okay, that's why I combine them with the end, and finally I have some SQL, part of the SQL statement, which I'm going to put right here. Okay, fine, then I can just call self prepare, pass that SQL statement, and this returns statement, of course. And on the statement, I'm going to call bind value, but I'm going to do this in the for loop. So actually it should be for each where we have the key and value, and the key is the attribute. Key corresponds to some value, some item, and then I call this bind value, and I specify right here the bind parameter will be :key. However, the value will be item. Okay, after this, on the statement, I just call execute, and I'm going to return on the statement fetch object, and I'm also going to specify the class name. Fetch object returns an object by default, but I want this function fetch object to return an instance of the user class, of the class on which find one is called. So again, I call static keyword right here and class. So this finally gives me an instance of the user class right here, and down below I can dump that user. That looks good. Okay, let's go to the browser, open the login page, and fix the bug. So too few arguments to function login. Okay, I think I know the reason. In the auth controller, we accept second argument response, but this is not passed from the router. So let's open router PHP, scroll down, and right here we only pass request when we call the function. So we can pass right here this response as well. Oops. Just like this. And we should not see this error anymore. We see something else, undefined variable model on line 7. I think I know the reason for this as well. From the auth controller, we don't actually pass the model, but we use that model in the login PHP right here. So we just need to pass the model. Model is the login form. Okay, the login form we create at the beginning of the method. So let's just refresh the page once again. One more error: email must not be accessed before initialization. That's a very common thing. Let's open the login and we can initialize the email and password at the beginning with empty strings. Let's have a look. Here we go. However, the labels are not user-friendly, and to make this working, we just need to override the labels method and just return an associative array where email corresponds to, for example, your email, and we just need to override password with password. Okay, refresh in the browser, and here we have it. If I just click this submit, I see immediately validation errors because the fields are basically required. So I just type an incorrect email address and let's hit the enter. User doesn't exist with this email. Let's enter correct email address but incorrect password. Password is incorrect. And let's just write correct password, hit the enter, and here we have the user. And that dump basically comes from the, where is it? From the user, where is it? No, it comes from the login, excuse me. So this is the dump, which is displayed in the browser, and the instance is app modules user. Okay, this is exactly what we wanted, and we take this and pass to the login. Okay, fine. Let's implement this login right now. For this, let's go to the application and okay, let's implement this maybe at the very bottom. Okay, oops, that should be a login, and the argument basically is an instance of DB model, and we just need to specify the name, user, and I'm going to declare a variable right here, public DB model to be, oops, user. And I'm going to put the question mark because this might be null. The current user might be null. If the user is guest just browsing the website, it might be null. Okay, scroll down and right here, we just need to save the user in the session. So this is an important thing to do. So we just need to take the user information, the user identifier, let's say, for example, ID, and save it in the session. And whenever we're browsing the website, going to another page, we need to take that identifier and select the user based on the identifier. We can also save the whole user inside the session, the whole object with first name, last name, and email, but that's not quite good solution because if I'm logged in my browser right here, and here's written hello Zura, for example, and I'm also logged in from my another device, mobile, for example, and I just change my my identifier, my email or my first name, and just change it into something else. So if I save in the session right here, it will be still Zura and it won't be changed. So it's always good practice to save just identifier, ID, for example, and then select the user based on that ID. In this case, we have ID right here, which is 12. So let's take that ID and save in the session, and then we can select the user based on this. Okay. Actually, we also need to implement the set and get methods in the session. Okay. So let's just continue writing here. So let's just first this user equals to user. After this, we need to take the primary key. So primary key equals whatever is the primary key for the user. Primary key. Okay, the DB model, it doesn't have primary key. So that's also something we need to implement. So primary key is absolutely necessary in order us to know about it. So right here, I'm going to create one more abstract method, public function primary key, and that should return string. Then in the user, so let's just open the user, we have to implement that method. So down below the table name, I'm going to implement primary key, and this will return ID. So for the user table, the primary key is ID. After this, I can call primary key method on the user, which gives me whatever is the name of the primary key. Then I need to get the primary value, okay, and that should be on the user. If I call, not call, but if I access the primary key property. If the primary key is ID, I just access the user ID, and it gives me the primary value. And on the application, on this session, I'm going to call set and specify the user key, and the primary value will be the value. So I set the primary value in the session, and I also set the user, but when I refresh the page, this user won't be set, and I need to read the session, get the primary value, select the user, and specify. So I need to do this in the constructor right here. So again, I have to take the table name, and right here I have to make a couple of changes. So I want to actually call user find one. But here's the thing. I don't want to write user find one. That's not quite true and quite good solution, because we should never use any class inside the core which is outside the core. Okay, because the idea of the core is that it's the same for every installation, and the rest of the files can be changed. So this core can be installed by anyone. However, the name of the user model might be different. It might call identity class or something else. So we cannot call just user find one. Instead, we can make this class as a configurable. So this is what I mean. I want inside the application to have public string, maybe user class, okay? And I need to accept that user class from this config. So in the application constructor, right here in the config phase, I'm going to specify user class equals to user class in this way, okay? And that user class right here is inside the config. So I'm going to take that user class from the config and assign to the property of the user class of the application, okay? After this, the user class will be app models user, and right here I can call this user class find one, and I need to specify right here ID corresponds to the value which should be taken from the session. And also, even this, it should not be hard-coded as an ID. Instead, it should be primary key for the user class. So I need to do a couple of things. Primary key equals this user class primary key, okay? And I want primary value as well. Primary value, which should be taken from this session. This session get for the user. If the user is guessed, the primary value will be null, so I just need to check if primary value exists in the session. In this case, I take the primary key and make a select. Okay, inside the where I specify that primary key corresponds to primary value. And finally, this should give me user. So I can assign this to this user equals to whatever is this. And using this approach, I should be able to successfully fetch the user when I navigate between pages. Okay, on every request, I select the user, I have it globally saved in the application, and I can access it from any point in the application. That's very important. Then I need to implement the get and set methods of the session. So let's open the session, scroll down right here, and just create public function set accepts key and value. Inside the session, we just immediately set get for key corresponds to the value, and we can do the same thing for get key, which returns session at key. If it doesn't exist, we can return false. And let's create third function as well, which will be remove. We will need this as well. So key, and this will simply unset from session given key. Okay, fine. So we have the login in the application, and at some point we will need logout as well. Okay, so let's just duplicate this. I think we don't need to duplicate, just create new function, logout, and what we need to do is that set the user to be null, and on this session I'm gonna call remove and specify the user right here. Okay, this is how logout will look like, and that should already work. So if we just now go to the main PHP, which is the layout, and let's scroll at the very top, and right here I want to print the current user, application app user. Let's have a look. So I just refresh the page and something is wrong. Okay, nothing actually happens. I don't know why. Let's go to the auth controller. And if the validate happened and the login happened, we redirect user to the home page and do just like this. However, this login obviously doesn't return true. Let's have a look. It's correct. So from here, we just need to return true. Let's refresh the page again. And here I see the user. That's the var dump, which I don't remember, to be honest, where this is. So I just search inside the whole project var underscore dump, and it is in the site controller. It's for handle contact. That's something else in the main PHP. My mistake. I don't want exit. Yeah, I thought I wrote it without exit. So refresh, and here we have it. So the user actually exists. So, and inside the session, if we just open inspect, so we have that in the application section. We have cookies. In cookies, we have session ID, and based on the session ID, the application detects that there is written the user identifier inside the session, and it happens just like this. So if I just delete the session ID and refresh the page, user doesn't exist, and we even have an error. Application user must not be accessed before initialization. That's very common error. Let's go to the application, and maybe in the constructor, if primary value doesn't exist, we can just assign this user equals to null. Okay, I think this is how we should do it. We see null right here. Let's open login page, try to log in again. And here we have the user. That looks perfect so far. So I'm going to remove this, and to just the following. So this is the navigation, and I want to hide these login and registration buttons if the user is authenticated, right? So I'm going to put this inside the if statement. PHP if the application app, and I actually want to create directly a static function inside the application is guest. So if application is guest, then we show login and registration. Okay, and we can write else if the application returns, if the is guest returns false, we just show the user information. Let's just copy and paste this right here, and let's just end if. Right here we write the URL will be logout, and I'm going to write welcome PHP echo application app user, and I want a method get display name. Okay, this get display name obviously doesn't exist on the user, and I'm also going to put right here a logout. Okay, so right now we should see an error. Call to undefined function is guest. Yeah, we have basically two errors, is guest, and another will be probably, I don't see, but it will be somewhere right here, get display name. Let's fix that is guest first. So this is relatively easier. So go to the application, scroll maybe very bottom, and create, actually I can do the following. So hit Alt and insert, add method, and right here I have the static method which returns if self application user doesn't exist, which means that the user is guest. Okay, the method is already implemented. Here is the second error, get display name, which doesn't exist, and I want that method to be exist on the user, so that whenever I need to display the user information, I just use that method. And here is the thing, I'm going to create I want that this specific user class needs to have get display name. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create inside the core user model, which will extend the DB model, and it will also be abstract. Okay, and I'm going to add one more abstract method, abstract public function get display name, which will return string. And now I'm gonna extend my user from the user model instead of the DB model. And I have to import that user model, and right here I have a red underline because I have to actually implement this get display name. So let's scroll at the very bottom and write get display name. The method is about to be implemented, and I'm going to return this first name space this last name. Here we have it. And if I refresh in the browser, I see welcome Zura because the first name and last name both is Zura, and I have that logout as well. Okay, I think it's already time to implement the logout. So let's go to the index.php, scroll down, and I'm gonna copy and paste one of the rows. Whenever get request is made on the logout, we have to call auth controllers logout. In the best case, the logout should happen using the post method. For security reasons, this is important. But of course, we are not going every single detail what the modern frameworks have. So that's why we're gonna leave this with get. So let's go to the auth controller and scroll down, and I'm going to implement the logout where I accept request and response to be just like this. And what I do, I just call application app logout, and I run on response redirect on the main URL. So this should already work. Refresh, click the logout, and here we have it. So user was actually logged out. I see login and registration. Click the login. Zura@example.com. Oops. Hit the enter, and here I have it. So we have successfully implemented now login and registration, which is very awesome. Now it's time to actually create protected roles. So we have contact and home, and both can be accessed for guest users, but we might need a profile page as well, where only the user who is authenticated should have access. On the websites, there are some protected pages like my orders page, where only authenticated users needs to access. Otherwise, it simply doesn't make any sense. Okay, so I think it's time to implement this one as well.